Welcome to the official 2024 VBridger rigging tutorial, part 2. This video covers rigging the brows and the eyes. Most of the basis of VBridger rigging is pretty similar to normal rigging, we just add some extra parameters and change a couple things here and there. The brow and eyes have gotten a lot easier since 2022, as all the extra rigged parameters can pretty much be blend shapes instead of keyforms. The organization of the file was covered in part 1, so if you're jumping in here and wondering why my params are in the folders that they're in, etc., go check part 1. I forgot to introduce our model in part 1. Her name is Bridgit. She's the mascot for VBridger. She is a blue troll. Starting with the brows, I need to edit my art meshes. Live2D gives you polyboxes by default. It displays the art, but it's useless for rigging. So I have two layers here, the left and the right. These are symmetrical, so I will need to enable mirror edit mode. Live2D sticks the axis for the mirror in the middle of the canvas, but depending on how the art was made, the point of symmetry might be different. Your art will either have its point of symmetry between 2 pixels or splitting a pixel. Mine is splitting a pixel, so I need to add a 0.5 to the axis position of the mirror edit mode in Live2D, or my meshes won't actually be correct on whatever side it's getting mirrored to. If your green line isn't anywhere near the middle of your model, it's likely that your model isn't centered to the canvas. You can still slide the Live2D mirror axis all the way over to wherever that center is. Just copy the final number down and save it in a notepad or somewhere, as this will be reset every time you open Live2D, and you want it to be the same every time you're editing art meshes. For the actual brow mesh, I'm using the poly pen. This allows me to draw lines and have Live2D auto-generate some evenly spaced mesh, perfect for thin lines like our brows. You can add and adjust points, and all of your changes will be mirrored across if you have mirror edit mode on. Holding Control and clicking the yellow circles lets you dynamically change the width of the polyline, so you can shape it to your mesh pretty easily. I'm deleting the extra edges and adding a little more definition on the inner corner. Then, since I currently have both left and right selected, I'm just clicking off of the mesh, selecting the right side, deleting all the left vertices, and repeating for the left side. After I'm done meshing the brows, I'll add a warp deformer parent to each and name it appropriately, Brow L and Brow R. I could key the meshes themselves, but warp deformers have extra benefits over meshes that I want to take advantage of, such as smoothing. You'll see me use it when I'm rigging in a minute. Now I'll adjust the parameters. Brow LY and Brow RY can both be blend shapes instead of keyforms. If you like using keyforms for your brows, you can still use keyforms. I simply like blend shapes because it allows me to key other things on the brow shapes easier, which can help the face feel more squishy. If you use keyforms, some of the later topics in this tutorial will not be as easy for you. I'm also creating 3 new blend shape parameters, Brow Inner Up C, Brow Inner Up R, and Brow Inner Up L. They will all be a 0 to 1 value, with the default set to 0. Brow Inner Up C will not receive any keys. It is a physics control parameter. It will drive our Brow Inner Up left and right parameters, and we'll set that up in a minute. For now, let's just rig us some eyebrows. I'll select the Brow _ L warp deformer and put keys on the left brow parameters. 3 for Brow Y, 2 for Brow Inner Up, same for the right side, and we're good to go. I can now select both brow warp deformers, and by setting both Brow Y parameters to 1, I can rig both at the same time. Brow Y is the same as you'd always rig it, up, down, make sure it's smooth, and that's about it. I'm using the deform brush, and if my mesh gets a little too pinched or crumpled, I'm switching to the smooth brush and smoothing it out. The smooth brush uses the Bezier division handles, so by reducing the width and height to 1, this lets me smooth the whole brow and get a smooth curve on the warp deformer. I always consider params with keys in the positive and negative, sort of a push and pull situation. This means that if the object goes up and out on the positive key, it goes down and in on the negative key. It should always move in opposites. If it gets bigger on positive, it should get a little smaller on negative, etc. This helps avoid weird jumps and jitters when you're using tracking. We'll also use extended interpolation for the brow motion to make the transitions extra smooth. For brow inner up, I'm turning brow Y to 0 and turning both brow inner up L and R to 1. Again, rigging both at the same time. For this shape, we want to make the eyebrows mostly move up from the middle of the face and look worried or concerned. You can also generally move the whole brow a bit if you like, but try not to move the outer brows up or down by much. I'm happy with the way that my parameters look, so we're going to move on to linking our control parameter to our left and right parameters with physics. This makes it so I can set up just one parameter in VTube Studio and have both blend shapes be affected rather than having to set up each individually. First, I'm opening the physics menu. I will create a new group and name it Brow Inner Up. We'll add an input and use Brow Inner Up C. Switch the type to angle and set the effectiveness to 100%. In the normalization of input part of the settings, change the minimum to 0, maximum to 50, and center to 25. Then add a pendulum. Slide the shaking intensity way down to 0.2-ish and bump the reaction time and overall acceleration both to about 6. Go to the output settings, click Add, and select Brow Inner Up L and Brow Inner Up R. Now we can slide Brow Inner Up C on our parameter list to full, and the inner brows follow almost perfectly, but not quite. The last value on our little output spreadsheet there is output magnitude. 100 means that the output is reaching the full range of the parameter it's associated with. Ours is only hitting about 88. Which means that we aren't hitting our full value range. We want our output to perfectly follow our input, so in this case you'll want to hit increase output, which will scale our output physics to match the parameter. If you're not familiar with the increase and decrease output buttons, the following is very important. I only use the increase output button for very specific cases like this one. This is because assuming your parameters are set correctly or equally, they should match the sway of the pendulum itself. If your output values all have different scales, it will not match the pendulum, and any changes you make to the pendulum will not accurately be reflected by the model. We'll come back to this feature and when to use it more in depth when we work on eye physics. For now, just remember that it should always be your very last step if you use it at all, and never edit the pendulum or input settings when your scale values aren't uniform. Any issues you're trying to correct will be much more difficult to address. Lastly, for the inner brows, I'm limiting some Blendshape weights. With just my brow L warp selected, I'm opening the Limit Settings for Blendshape Weights menu. In the Blendshape box, I'm choosing Brow Inner Up L. Next, I'm going to select the parameter my blend shape will be limited by. In this case, I'm using Brow LY to limit my Brow Inner Up L. I'll choose the Fold Line 5 preset and add the parameter. This means that the Brow Inner Up L will be 0% when Brow LY is at 1, but Brow Inner Up L will stay 100% when Brow LY is at -1 or 0. I'll do the same for Brow R, and now you can see the brows fully working in the physics menu as they should. Brow Inner Up C makes our character look worried when Brow Y is neutral or down, but it turns off when Brow Y is up. The reason we do this is because when tracking your face with iPhone, Brow Inner Up always turns on when you raise your eyebrows at all. even if you're not making a worried expression. Generally, we don't always want the character to look worried just because somebody raised their eyebrows, and that's why we turn the brow inner up off in those cases. We are finished with the brows, so I am moving on to meshing the eyes. This is more likely to differ heavily model to model. Your art will be different than my art, so I'm going to speed the majority of this section up. For the eye mask, I'm using a polyline with 3 vertices across, so I have a line of vertices directly on the edge of the art. We also want it to be a decent density, so we have a lot of control over the shape, and so we can deform it smoothly. For the outside of an inverse mask, I generally keep the art mesh super close or within the art's edges, even cutting off the edges. Since the art itself is invisible, we will be relying on the art mesh shape. This way I know my art mesh edges will 100% mask any art that they cover. In order to animate our inverse mask like a normal layer and not have to deal with the extra vertices, we'll make a duplicate of the inverse mask layer. Just select the layers, copy, then paste. Then we'll glue the edges that we actually want to control to the original layer. We'll modify the glue weight so that moving our duplicate layer moves the original layer, then we'll delete the extra vertices from the duplicate layer. Now our inverse mask copy layer can be animated like you'd animate a regular layer mask, and you don't need to worry about the extra vertices from using an inverse mask. I'm leaving the rest of the meshing as a time lapse. I will now vanish until I am back. Once the eye meshes are done, I will edit the parameters. First, I'm going to make the maximum of EyeOpen and EyeOpen 2 instead of 1. I'll make the eye smile params blend shapes and create new parameters called IL squint and IR squint. I usually just replicate the eye smile params and rename them because that's easier than creating new ones. I'm going to add some warp deformers to separate the left from right, as well as the iris from the outer eyelids. And this time I'm going to key the left and right eyes on the IR params all together. Since we're keying more params for the eyes, this will just help us stay symmetrical without having to touch the UI so much. I'll separate them properly afterwards. For the actual keying of the eye, I'll speed things up quite a bit as I make lots of fine adjustments and we don't want to be here all day. First, I'll make the blink shapes, starting with the upper eyelash. I want to make the upper eyelash pretty when it's closed first because the upper eyelid shape is often the most important to the blink. The lower lash will get hidden under it in most cases, so it's what you'll actually see. I usually choose a smooth, calm arc with a slight downturn on the inner eye corner for my default blink shape. Once the upper eyelashes are in place, I'll isolate and adjust the other meshes to match. The isolate button in Live 2D is S for solo. The lower eyelash goes under the upper eyelash for me as my upper eyelash is very thick. I also want to make sure that the eyelash corner and the lower eyelash stay aligned. This will just look better because they are attached to the same eyelid. They should be aligned with each other. With our eyelashes done, it is time to adjust the mask and hide all that inner eye that is still visible here. I'm going to use the Deform Path tool as this will keep the mesh from getting too crunched vertically. If we just use scale to make it flat and small, our mesh will get progressively squished as the character blinks. This can result in the eye looking weirdly sharp or high resolution compared to the rest of the face, so I don't like to just scale it down. I'm making sure that there's no gaps inside of our mask mesh while it's isolated. This matters more if you don't have thick eyelashes that cover the entire mask. I'm uncrunching the mesh whenever it gets crunched by the deform path. This is because we want to move the mask as vertically as possible. My inner corners are crunching a lot due to this, but it'll ensure that our eyelash stays attached to our eyelid as our eyelash moves straight down and the mask needs the same motion or they will separate. Sometimes I separate the upper and the lower eyelid masks to make this easier instead of having it all as one art layer. As when it's all one mesh, you have to sort of open the eye a lot to see how it blends, and it needs a lot more effort to make sure that the mesh stays nice. Now I'm just making sure that my eyelashes stay attached to my eyelid, and now I'll do everything that we did to the left eye to the right eye. As long as your deformation is smooth, you are able to move all of your meshes together and they should stay smooth. If you only move one mesh, you'll ruin your previous work. Once the blink is looking smooth, I will work on the eye wide shape. To make my life slightly easier and keep our deformation super clean, I'm going to copy the blink shape with Ctrl plus Shift plus C. This copies the mesh position. When I go to EyeOpen at 2 now, I can hit Ctrl plus Shift plus B for blend pasting. This opens a little blend menu. If we made the value of the blend paste 100, it would simply paste our blink shape. By that logic, if we set it to a negative value, it'll push our mesh in the opposite direction of blink. This creates a perfect linear deformation between our blink shape at 0 and our eye wide shape at 2, assuming our 2 value before blending was the same as our default eye shape. If you've already deformed the mesh before you try to blend paste, you'll have some issues and less predictable results. There are some issues, but there's only a few problems and they are easy to quickly fix. Mostly my corners here are separating from each other, so I just close those up, and my eye white is not moving higher because I didn't move it too much on the blink shape, so the inverse of the blink isn't going to move it that high, so I just need to move that up a bit and we're mostly good. Once I'm happy with the eye wide shape, I'll throw extended interpolation on all the EyeOpen meshes. When using extended interpolation, if the positive and negative motion isn't equal enough, we can run into a problem where the meshes sort of bounce back between values. Since my mesh is bouncing, I'm going to blend paste once again with a small value. I'll double check for any new issues since I've pushed the eye wide even further and fix them. I'm only making it wider so extended interpolation is smooth. It's not actually necessary, and sometimes can push the eyes a little bit too far for some characters. There's no absolute truth on what's best, just vibes and what you think looks okay or not for the character you're working on. I'm quickly going to check my brow Y shapes while my eyes are at their widest to make sure that they aren't crossing over each other too much. If they overlap a little, it's okay, but if they overlap a lot, you'll end up with a very cartoony and squishy model very shortly. It might be what you want. It might not be. So just whatever works for your character. This is where using blend shapes for our brows comes in super handy. I can simply add some keys to the eyelid deformers and smoosh them so they look right. I work on the smoosh while the eyebrows are down and the eyes are at their widest to make sure I don't get any accidental overlap later. It won't conflict with our EyeOpen params at all because it's using blend shapes and it's on the warp deformer that is the parent of the eye meshes, and it looks really nice. Since I'm smooshing the eyelids on brow down, I'm also pulling the eyelids up a bit on brow up. I'll also give everything a quick smooth and make sure that the squish is looking good at all times before moving on. I can even add keys for brow interrupt. For each side, left and right, apply the Blendshape weights, and we're going to be very responsive and expressive when we get to tracking. Something that always catches my attention when looking at blinks is where the irises are. If they ever go under the upper lid, we basically have problems. The character will end up looking like their eyes are rolling back in their head. Not ideal. To fix this, I'll add some keys to the iris deformers on EyeOpen and move them down on blink. And since we move them down on blink, I move them up a little on eye wide just so that it doesn't look like they get stuck when the model's in motion. I'm finding my blink itself is a little low compared to the neutral eye shape, so I'm also moving it up a bit. I'll isolate the iris and really double check that it's pretty much always under the upper eyelid. It's okay if the upper eyelid covers it, but I never want it visible above the upper eyelid. Not even once. The blink is done now, so it is time to touch our eye smile and squint parameters. Eye smile will only occur when the eye is closed, so we'll only adjust the blend shape when the eyes are also closed. We just want to make the eyes look happy. It's straightforward. Eye squint happens when the eye is neutral or wide, so we'll only adjust the blend shape when the eye is open. Before we can limit the Blendshape weights, we have to split left from right, so I'll just move all of the left eyelid, eyelash deformers, and meshes to the left eye parameters at this point. For eye smile, we want to limit it by EyeOpen and use the Fold Line 3 preset. This will make eye smile 100% when EyeOpen is 0, and eye smile 0% when EyeOpen is 1 or 2. I'll quickly apply the Blendshape weight limit to the right side as well, since we already have the preset selected. For eye squint, we'll also limit it by EyeOpen, but this time we'll use Fold Line 4. This will make eye squint 100% when EyeOpen is 1 or 2, and eye squint 0 when EyeOpen is 0. With this, our main eyelid parameters are finished. Now we'll move on to eyeball X and Y parameters and get Bridgit looking around. We're going to get into the insanely powerful yet complicated Apply 3D Rotation Expression tool. This is relatively new at the time of this video, and we'll be using this tool a lot more when we get to doing the head angles, but there are many ways to use this tool, and the eyes are an amazing place to dip our toes in. At the bottom of the 3D menu, there's a checkbox for automatically update the keyform when the setting value changes. This is a double-edged sword. It gets quite heavy to edit the settings if this is on, so I turn it off. This means that we need to manually hit the Update Keyform button whenever we want to apply changes that we make to the settings. It's slightly more annoying than having everything be automatically applied, but it will save you some headaches. Any changes you make to the settings will only save if you update keyform. If you click off the menu or click another deformer, your changes will vanish. To roughly go over how the tool works, we add warp deformers to the list with the plus button. It'll add whatever you have selected. Then each deformer has its own 3D settings as seen on the right of the menu. To start at the top of the menu with parameter mapping, you can pick which parameters the 3D expression saves to. I'm setting this to only eyeball X to start, so my second parameter is empty. I'll adjust the center of rotation to be in the dead center of the right pupil, as when the character is looking at us, the center of the eye and where it rotates from would be in the center of their pupil. When I update keyform, it'll automatically add the keys to the parameter if they don't already exist. I'm using planarization mode, so my warp deformer is getting rotated directly around the center of rotation. We don't want that, so I'm adding some Z direction offset. This adds theoretical depth to the rotation, increasing the imaginary space between the warp deformer and its rotation point. Once I'm happy with my offset, I copy the settings to the left iris. If I just update keyform, it will use the same rotation point as our right eye. We don't want that. We want the left eye's rotation to be in the center of the left pupil, not the right pupil. So we'll go ahead and move the center of rotation over. If I select both warp meshes with Shift plus click in the 3D menu, I can update multiple warps at the same time. If the settings differ between the two warps, they show in green text. Since the center of rotation is different, for example, it is green. This also means that I can edit any shared settings and update the rotation without having to go to each individual warp deformer, which is pretty nice. If you already have parameters keyed to your warp deformer, the 3D expression will only apply to the default value of any additional parameters. I've created an example here to explain. I have an empty warp deformer here that already has keys on an extra parameter. The extra parameter's default value is 0. The 3D expression will apply to my angle X and angle Y parameters, and when I update keyform, the angles will work, but only when my extra parameter is at 0. If I want to apply the 3D expression to the extra parameter's other key, I have to change the default value of the extra parameter to the value of the key that I want to affect. Once I do that, the 3D settings will apply. It's a little extra legwork and a little annoying to keep track of, but it allows you to apply different 3D settings to different keys, which is pretty nice and not too bad. It only gets super messy if you have a lot of other keys and multiple other keyed parameters. Try to avoid that if you are using the 3D expression menu. Back to Bridgit and our eye rigging. I only want the eyes rotating on the X-axis when the eyes are closed. So I've left angle Y out of my 3D menu, and I'll change the default of EyeOpen to 0, so I'm only affecting the closed eye. Then when I update the keyform, the eyes are moving on X, and only when the EyeOpen is 0. Now to work on the EyeOpen shapes, I'm adding eyeball Y to both Deformer's 3D settings, and I'll change the default of the EyeOpen param to 1. Right now, IY is at 30 degrees. It's pretty far under our eyelids, so I'll turn the Y range down. 15 degrees is pretty solid. I usually try for a similar, if not the exact same range as I'm using for head angles. It makes tuning the model so it's looking at the camera easier. It'll never be super perfect, but this makes it easy to get close. I'm adding extended interpolation to the eye angles so that they move smoothly. I'll set the EyeOpen default to 2 and update the keyform in the 3D menu to get the eye-wide iris moving as well. Make sure that you don't forget to return the EyeOpen default to 1. It'll mess up anything that has blend shapes and keys on EyeOpen if we leave the default on the wrong number. Now I'll move the Iris L warp deformer keys that are on EyeOpen R to EyeOpen L, and the iris look directions are done. We can make this much better though, we still look a little stiff. I'll grab our eyelid deformers and add keys to just 0 and 1 of EyeOpen, specifically not 2. We'll split left from right when we're done again, so I'm keying them together. I'll also add keys to eyeball X and Y. I just want them to follow the look directions a little when the eye is open. I'll edit the X keys and then the Y keys and use Ctrl+4 to calculate the corners. And now the eyelids follow the eye look directions and we're looking soft and squishy. Once I'm happy with the eyelid motion on eyeball XY, I will then add the key to EyeOpen 2. When you add a key that is missing, like I did for 2, it'll just copy whatever the motion was on the closest key. So because the key on 1 is closest to the end key that is missing, our new key on the end will have the same deformation as whatever is happening on key 1. This means that I don't need to copy all 8 custom deformation keys from EyeOpen at 1 to EyeOpen at 2. To finish these up, I'm adding extended interpolation and splitting the left from right, and I'll just go through and check how it looks with all of our blend shapes, the brows. I'll smooth it out and adjust it as necessary just to make it look nice at all times. I decided that the eyelids move too much on the bottom when the eyes are wide, so I just copied the neutral position and pasted it to the eye Y shape for the eyelids, and that just tones it down a little bit and looks a little bit better for like a wide surprised eye. I also decided to add some keys to the eye highlights because when we blink they go under the eyelid and I don't like how that looks. So I'm just moving them down when the blink occurs, moving them up when the eye gets a little wider, and I think that looks a little bit better. And there we have it! VBridger eyes. Most of that was just normal rigging. There was only a few things for VBridger in there, but VBridger is built off of standard rigging, so we're covering everything. I'll see you in part 3 for the mouth. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and join the Discord if you have time. Also ask questions in there. There might be answers.